Some wars begin with thunder. Others begin with the soft thud of a trash can tipped over at dawn. The street was quiet. A cul-de-sac wrapped in manicured silence. Lawns trimmed to regulation height. Mailboxes aligned like soldiers. And in the middle of it all, one trash can, slightly askew. It wasn't rebellion. Not yet. It was just a bin. Black plastic, sun-faded, resting near the curb. But to one woman, it was an affront. A violation. A threat to the aesthetic order of the neighborhood. She walked briskly. Her sandals slapped the pavement with purpose. Her clipboard a weapon of bureaucracy. And with a swift motion, she knocked the bin over. Not once. Not twice. But every Tuesday morning, like clockwork. The homeowner watched from behind the blinds. Not angry. Not afraid. Just curious. What made someone care so deeply about the angle of a trash can? This is not a story about garbage. It's a story about dignity. About boundaries. About the quiet ways we reclaim space when the world tries to shrink us. It's a story told in whispers. In motion-triggered footage. In letters typed in Times New Roman. And in the final act, in wood and nails and a structure that stood not just for trash, but for truth. The sun hadn't yet crested the rooftops. A pale blue hush lingered over the cul-de-sac, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Birds chirped in half-hearted rhythms. Sprinklers ticked like distant metronomes. And then a knock. Not on the door. Not on the window. On the trash can. It was subtle. A plastic thud. The kind of sound that might be mistaken for wind. But it wasn't wind. It was ritual. Every Tuesday, just before sunrise, she came. Clipboard in hand. Sunglasses perched like armor. Her gait was purposeful, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak. She didn't pause. She simply walked up to the bin, tilted her head, and knocked it over. The homeowner, let's call him Eli, watched from behind the blinds. He didn't move. Didn't react. Just observed. Like a naturalist studying a rare bird. He had lived here for 7 years. Paid his dues. Mowed his lawn. Painted his fence. But this was new. 3 days later, it arrived. Typed, folded. Delivered not by mail, but slipped under the door like a secret. Dear resident, your trash receptacle was found in violation of HOA Regulation 14.3b, visibility from the street on non-collection days. Please ensure compliance to avoid further action. No greeting. No signature. Just rules. Eli read it twice. Then a third time. He checked the calendar. It had been collection day. The bin had been placed precisely where the city instructed. He walked outside. Measured the distance from the curb. Took a photo. Then he did nothing. The following Tuesday, it happened again. Same time. Same motion. This time, Eli was ready. He had installed a small camera, discreet, tucked beneath the eaves. It captured everything. The approach. The pause. The knock. She didn't look around. Didn't hesitate. Just tipped the bin and walked away. Eli watched the footage that evening. He didn't feel anger. He felt curiosity. What compelled someone to enforce order so obsessively? Was it power? Control? Or something deeper, something fragile? Trash cans are not symbols. They are containers. They hold what we discard. What we no longer need. But in this neighborhood, they had become something else. Aesthetic threats. Visual pollution. Markers of rebellion. Eli began to see them differently. Each bin, each lid, each wheel became a metaphor. For boundaries. For autonomy. For the quiet dignity of space. He started documenting them. Photos. Notes. He created a folder titled Binology. Not out of spite. Out of fascination. He attended the next HOA meeting. Held in the community center. Fluorescent lights. Lukewarm coffee. The room was filled with polite tension. People smiled without showing teeth. When the topic of waste receptacle compliance arose, Eli raised his hand. I'd like to ask about Regulation 14.3b. Specifically, its enforcement. The chairwoman blinked. Adjusted her glasses. It's about maintaining neighborhood standards. Is there a grace period? A margin of error? We expect bins to be removed promptly. Eli didn't argue. He didn't protest. He built a small enclosure. Wooden slats. Neutral tones. Just tall enough to shield the bin from view. It was tasteful. Minimal. A compromise between function and form. He placed the bin inside. Took a photo. Sent it to the HOA with a note. Receptacle now shielded. Compliance ensured. No reply. The next Tuesday, she came. Walked past the enclosure. Paused. Tilted her head. Then walked on. No knock. No letter. Eli watched from the window. Not triumphant. Just still. He didn't feel like he had one. He felt like he had reclaimed something. Not just space. But silence. That night, Eli sat on his porch. The stars blinked overhead. Somewhere, galaxies collided. Black holes spun. And here, on Earth, a man had built a box to protect a bin from a woman with a clipboard. It was absurd. It was beautiful. He smiled. Not because it was over. But because it had begun. The eye in the eaves. The camera was small. No bigger than a matchbox. Tucked beneath the eaves like a secret. It didn't blink. Didn't speak. It simply watched. Eli had installed it not out of vengeance, but out of curiosity. He wanted to understand the rhythm. The ritual. The reason. Each Tuesday, the footage arrived. A woman in sandals. Clipboard in hand. She approached with the precision of a metronome. Paused. Knocked. Walked away. There was no hesitation. No glance toward the house. No awareness of being seen. She was performing a duty. Or perhaps a dance. The psychology of control. Eli began to study her movements. Frame by frame. He noticed patterns. The way she tilted her head. The way her fingers curled around the clipboard. The way she never touched the bin directly, always with the edge of her shoe. It was clinical. Detached. Almost sacred. He wondered what she saw when she looked at the bin. Did it offend her? Did it threaten her sense of order? Control is a fragile thing. It often hides in rules. In regulations. In the illusion of tidiness. But beneath it there is fear. Fear of chaos. Fear of unpredictability. Fear of the bin that dares to stand alone. The archive. Eli began saving the footage. Not out of spite. Out of reverence. He created folders. Labeled them by date. Annotated them with notes. Tuesday, 6:42 a.m. Knock. No pause. Tuesday, 6:41 a.m. Knock. Slight hesitation. Tuesday, 6:43 a.m. Knock. Wind present. It became a study. A meditation. A quiet rebellion. He wasn't fighting back. He was bearing witness. The mirror. One morning, Eli turned the camera toward himself. He stood in the driveway. Faced the lens. And waited. He wanted to see what she saw. A man. A bin. A house. He played the footage back. It was ordinary. Unremarkable. And yet, to her, it was a violation. He realized then this wasn't about him. It was about the story she had written in her mind. A story where bins were enemies. And she was the guardian. The second letter. Another letter arrived. Typed, folded, delivered by hand. Dear resident, continued non-compliance with Regulation 14.3b has been observed. Please note that further violations may result in fines. Eli smiled. He had complied. He had built the enclosure. He had documented everything. But the story had already been written. And in her version, he was still the villain. The second enclosure. Eli built again. This time, taller. Wider. With slats that allowed airflow but blocked view. It was elegant. Architectural. A statement. Neighbors began to notice. Some asked questions. Others nodded silently. The enclosure became a symbol. Not of defiance. But of dignity. The shift. The camera kept recording. But something changed. She began to pause. Look around. Hesitate. One morning, she didn't knock. She stood still. Then walked away. Eli watched the footage. Replayed it. Studied the silence. It wasn't surrender. It was uncertainty. The story was shifting. And she didn't know how to rewrite it. The philosophy of watching. To watch is to witness. To witness is to honor. Even the absurd. Even the petty. Eli had become a chronicler. Of bins. Of bureaucracy. Of the quiet war waged in suburbia. But more than that, he had become a mirror. Reflecting the fragility of control. The poetry of resistance. And the beauty of reclaiming space. The paper trail. They came weekly. Typed in sterile fonts. Folded with precision. Delivered not by mail, but slipped under the door like warnings from a ghost. Each letter bore the same tone, detached. Polite. Unyielding. Dear resident, continued non-compliance with Regulation 14.3b has been observed. Eli read them like riddles. Each one a puzzle of passive aggression. Each one a reminder that silence, too, can be weaponized. He began collecting them, stacking them in a drawer, labeling them by date. Not out of fear. Out of fascination. The language of control. The letters never mentioned names. Only resident. Only violation. Only compliance. It was the language of systems. Of distance. Of power without presence. Eli studied the phrasing. The way it avoided emotion. The way it cloaked judgment in formality. He realized something: the letters weren't meant to communicate. They were meant to intimidate. The response. Eli wrote back. Not with anger. With poetry. Dear board, I have built an enclosure. It shields the bin from view. It breathes. It stands. It complies. He printed it on thick paper, folded it once, delivered it by hand. No reply. The philosophy of paper. Paper is fragile. It tears. It burns. It fades. But it also remembers. Eli began writing more. Letters to no one. Reflections. Questions. He placed them in envelopes. Labeled them, Tuesday Thoughts. Then Reflections. On the nature of control. He wasn't sending them. He was archiving a moment. A movement. A quiet rebellion. The third enclosure. The letters continued. Despite the enclosure. Despite the documentation. So Eli built again. This time, with stone. Low walls. A small gate. A lantern above the bin that glowed at dusk. It was beautiful. Neighbors stopped to admire it. One left a note. This is art. Eli smiled. Not because he had one, but because he had transformed. The neighborhood shift. The letters began arriving less frequently. Then stopped. But something else began. Neighbors started building their own enclosures. Wood. Brick. Even recycled metal. It wasn't coordinated. It was instinctive. A quiet wave of dignity. Of reclaiming space. Of saying, without saying, we see you. The final letter. One morning, Eli found a letter. Different paper. Handwritten. Dear Mr. Eli, we regret any distress caused. Your efforts to maintain aesthetic harmony are noted and appreciated. The matter is considered resolved. No apology. No acknowledgement of error. Just closure. Eli folded it. Placed it in the drawer. Labeled it, The End. The reflection. That night, Eli sat by the stone enclosure. The lantern glowed softly. The bin stood quietly. He thought about the letters. The knocks. The silence. He didn't feel victorious. He felt whole. Some wars end with treaties. Others end with stillness. This one ended with a bin. A gate. And a man who chose poetry over rage. The blueprint. Eli didn't sketch it. He felt it. The enclosure wasn't just a structure. It was a philosophy. A reply to every letter, every knock, every glance. He chose stone. Not for its strength, for its silence. The build. He worked slowly. One stone at a time. No rush. No noise. Neighbors passed by. Some nodded. Some paused. One whispered, "It's beautiful." Eli didn't answer. He was listening to the rhythm of resistance. The lantern. Atop the enclosure, he placed a lantern. Solar-powered. Soft glow. It lit up at dusk. Not to illuminate the bin. To honor it. It was no longer trash. It was ritual. It was memory. The mirror. Inside the enclosure, Eli placed a mirror. Small. Round. Hung just above the bin. It reflected the sky. The trees. Sometimes, Eli's own face. He called it the witness. Because every rebellion needs one. The stillness. The enclosure changed things. Not just the bin. The air. Birds nested nearby. A cat slept beside it. Children played near it without fear. It became a sanctuary. Not for trash. For peace. The letter that never came. Weeks passed. No letters. No knocks. Eli waited. Not with dread. With curiosity. But silence is its own reply. The visitors. One day, a woman came. She wore a camera. She asked questions. Is this a protest? Eli smiled. It's a poem. She nodded. Took photos. Left quietly. Later, others came. Artists. Writers. A man who built birdhouses. They didn't ask permission. They just contributed. The expansion. The enclosure grew. Not in size. In meaning. Someone added a bench. Someone else planted lavender. It became a place to sit. To breathe. To think. The bin remained. Always central. Always quiet. The message. One morning, Eli found a note tucked under the lantern. Thank you. For making space. For making silence sacred. No name. No signature. Just gratitude. The legacy. Eli didn't build a monument. He built a metaphor. The enclosure wasn't about trash. It was about dignity. About choosing grace over compliance. And in doing so, he gave others permission to build their own sanctuaries. The morning after. The sun rose gently. The bin stood quietly. No letters. No knocks. Just dew on stone and birdsong. Eli brewed tea. Sat on the bench. Watched the enclosure breathe. It had become part of the landscape. Not a statement. A presence. The elder. An old man passed by. Paused. Looked at the bin. Then at Eli. You kept it. Eli nodded. It never asked to leave. The man smiled. Neither did I. They sat together. Two quiet rebels. Two keepers of place. The memory. Eli remembered the beginning. The knock. The letter. The feeling of being small. He remembered the fear. The doubt. The urge to comply. But he also remembered the choice. To build. To write. To stay. The compass. The bin became a compass. A way to measure change. To mark time. Neighbors used it as a meeting point. Children called it the quiet corner. Artists left sketches tucked in its gate. It was no longer a bin. It was a story. The thread. Eli began weaving. Not with yarn. With words. He wrote a small book, The Bin That Stayed. It held poems. Reflections. Sketches from neighbors. Letters never sent. He placed a copy inside the enclosure. Wrapped in cloth. Tied with twine. The years. Time passed. Seasons changed. The bin aged. But it remained. Unmoved. Unbothered. New residents came. Some asked about it. Some didn't. But all felt it. The mirror again. The mirror inside the enclosure cracked. Not shattered. Just a line like a wrinkle. Eli didn't replace it. He let it stay. Because even reflections age. Even symbols evolve. The student. One day, a student came. Studying urban design. She asked questions. Took notes. Why didn't you remove it? Eli replied. Because it was never the problem. She nodded. Wrote that down. The piece. The bin became invisible. Not because it was hidden. Because it was accepted. No one complained. No one corrected. It simply belonged. The legacy. Eli grew older. Walked slower. Sat longer. But the bin stayed. The enclosure stood. The lantern still glowed. And when Eli was gone, the neighbors kept it lit. Because some rebellions don't need successors. They just need caretakers. The box. Eli kept a box beneath his bed. Not locked. Not hidden. Just waiting. Inside. The first letter. A photo of the enclosure. A pressed lavender sprig. A note that read, "This is art." It wasn't a collection. It was a memory map. The pages. He began compiling. Not for publication. For preservation. Each page held a moment. A neighbor's sketch. A child's poem. A reflection on silence. He called it the Archive of Grace. Not a book. A sanctuary. The thread revisited. Eli traced the thread. From knock to enclosure. From bin to revolution. He saw how one act became many. How resistance became ritual. And how ritual became belonging. The visit. A young filmmaker came. She had heard the story. Wanted to document it. Eli didn't pose. He didn't explain. He simply opened the box. Let her read. Let her feel. She cried. Not loudly. Just enough. The lantern's glow. The lantern atop the enclosure still glowed each night. Neighbors said it helped them sleep. That it reminded them some things endure. Eli began calling it the Lightkeeper. Because every archive needs a guardian. The lesson. A teacher asked Eli to speak. To explain the bin. The war. The peace. He declined. Instead, he sent a box. Inside. A mirror. A letter. A stone. The class built their own enclosure. Not for trash. Forethought. The stillness. Eli grew quieter. Not withdrawn. Just distilled. He spent mornings by the bin. Afternoons with the archive. Evenings watching the lantern. He didn't seek legacy. He lived it. The departure. One day, Eli was gone. No ceremony. No announcement. Just absence. But the bin remained. The enclosure stood. The lantern glowed. And the archive was found beneath the bed. The reading. Neighbors gathered. Opened the archive. Read aloud. Each page a whisper. Each letter a breath. They didn't mourn. They remembered. And in remembering, they rebuilt. The continuation. The trash can war never ended. Because it was never a war. It was a question. What do we protect? And the answer, written in stone, lit by lantern, preserved in pages, was dignity. The quiet rebellion. The bin stayed. The story spread. The archive grew. And somewhere, in another town, a knock was heard. A letter arrived. A choice was made. And a new enclosure was built. Because quiet rebellions don't need noise. They need memory. And memory, once planted, never leaves.